Hopefully, the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, as headed by its highly respected chairman, Brendan Carr, will impose the maximum fines and punishment. Presidential election with their interview of failed presidential candidate Kamala Harris mentions the name Trump in a derogatory in connection with the Abrego Garcia case where Trump disappeared Garcia, a El Salvador individual who was living, a migrant who was living in Maryland almost every week, 60 Minutes, which is being sued for billions of dollars for the fraud they committed in the 2024.
Who would have thought we'd see the day Donald Trump got booed off stage like a bad comedian at an open mic night? At the Libertarian Party convention, Trump faced something he's not used to, a crowd that wasn't buying his usual nonsense. The orange man stood there in shock as people shouted, "End the Fed," while he tried to brag about his so-called achievements. His face turned even more orange than usual as he realized his cheap tricks weren't working. This wasn't his carefully selected MAGA crowd. These were actual libertarians who weren't afraid to tell Donnie Diapers exactly what they thought of him. Hey, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button. We know you want to. Go ahead, we'll wait. Alright, appreciate it. Now, back to the video. Picture this. Donald Trump at a normal rally. He's the center of attention, the crowd hanging on his every word, cheering at his punchlines before he even finishes them. His typical rallies are basically political Disney World, where he's Mickey Mouse and everyone paid good money to see him. Behind the scenes, Trump's team works harder than Santa's elves to create this perfect illusion. They're not just letting anyone through those doors. No. They're handpicking supporters like they're casting extras for a movie. You look especially MAGA today. Front row for you.
We look forward to seeing President Bukele of El Salvador tomorrow in the White House, is what he posted last night. But this weekend's broadcast tops them all. Wow. This goes on with an alternation between all caps and lowercase and like incoherent sentences. But then at the end of Donald Trump's post, he goes, they, being CBS and 60 Minutes, should lose their license, which is substantial for their unlawful and illegal behavior. That's what Donald Trump is doing on Sunday.
The visual of adoring fans in matching red hats creates exactly the kind of TV footage that makes Trump look like the most popular kid at political prom. But then came the Libertarian Convention, a completely different ball game. Imagine sending a pampered house cat into the wilderness. That's basically what happened to Trump when he stepped onto that stage. No pre-screened audience, no carefully orchestrated seating chart, no guarantee that everyone would clap at his greatest hits. Just a bunch of libertarians who actually read books about political theory instead of just tweeting about it. And oh boy, was Trump not ready. The moment he walked out, expecting his usual royal welcome, you could practically see the cognitive dissonance on his face. Where's my standing ovation? Did someone forget to tell these people they're supposed to love me? The look on his face was like someone who confidently walked into a bathroom stall only to discover there's no toilet paper. The difference was immediately visible in his physical presence too. At his rallies, Trump struts around like a peacock with extra feathers. Big gestures, chest puffed out, the whole commander-in-chief cosplay. But at the Libertarian Convention, as those boos started rolling in, his trademark expansive body language started shrinking faster than a wool sweater in a hot dryer. Trump tried to power through with his usual tactics, the bombastic claims, the catchy slogans, the self-congratulatory riffs, but it was like watching someone try to pay for groceries with Monopoly money. These people weren't buying what he was selling, and no amount of believe me folks could change that. The real kicker was his voice, that booming, authoritative tone he uses to whip his base into a frenzy. Gone. As the hostile reception continued, his voice actually climbed higher, getting more strained with each failed attempt to win them over. It was the vocal equivalent of a slowly deflating balloon. The man who usually feeds off crowd energy like a political vampire suddenly had no energy to drink. You could literally watch Trump's famous confidence melt away in real time. He started doing that fake smile thing, you know the one, where his mouth says, "I'm totally fine with this," but his eyes scream, "Help me." The panic became more evident as he realized that for once, he couldn't just have security throw out the hecklers because the entire room was basically one big heckler. The contrast between a typical Trump rally and this libertarian ambush couldn't be more stark. At his rallies, Trump basks in adulation like a cat in a sunbeam. Every word is met with cheers, every joke with laughter, every accusation with boos aimed at his enemies. It's a perfectly choreographed dance where Trump always leads and never steps on toes. But at the Libertarian Convention, that dance turned into a chaotic mosh pit. Instead of yes men and superfans, Trump faced political wonks who could actually cite the Constitution beyond just the Second Amendment. These weren't people who would overlook contradictions or accept vague promises. They came armed with facts, figures, and a stubborn unwillingness to be charmed. Without his carefully cultivated environment of adoration, Trump's entire persona, that unshakable, all-knowing, always-winning character he's built his political career on, started to crumble faster than a cookie in a toddler's grip. It revealed something his critics have claimed all along, the emperor's new clothes situation. When stripped of his protective bubble of pre-screened admirers, the supposedly thick-skinned businessman revealed himself to be astonishingly thin-skinned after all. While Trump's rallies are carefully designed to shield him from criticism, the Libertarian Convention showed what happens when a self-proclaimed political genius faces an audience that actually understands politics. Ever wonder why Trump's face turned redder than his MAGA hat? These folks weren't just booing, they were fact-checking him in real time with devastating precision. Trump tried his usual trick of bragging about imaginary achievements, but the Libertarian crowd immediately pounced with specific policy call-outs. When he started criticizing Biden's economic policies, multiple voices from the crowd shouted, "That's you," directly challenging his attempt to shift blame. The look of confusion on Trump's face was priceless, like a math teacher who suddenly realized he'd been teaching the wrong formula for years. The real fireworks started when Trump mentioned the economy. Instead of the adoring cheers he's accustomed to, libertarians hammered him about the massive federal deficits that exploded during his presidency. This wasn't the vague criticism he could easily dismiss. These were people armed with actual numbers and fiscal knowledge. Trump's economic success story narrative crumbled faster than a sandcastle at high tide when confronted with his actual record of government spending. One of the most jarring moments came when chants of "End the Fed" erupted through the convention hall. Trump's bewildered expression showed he had absolutely no prepared response to this core libertarian position. Unlike the programmed "lock her up" chants at his rallies, this was an authentic policy demand that exposed Trump's shallow understanding of monetary policy. He stood there looking like a substitute teacher who suddenly realized he wandered into an advanced economics class instead of basic arithmetic. His handling of COVID-19 became another target for the libertarian crowd's razor-sharp criticism. While Trump's usual audiences praise his pandemic leadership, these libertarians blasted his support for lockdowns and massive government spending packages. They weren't having any of his attempts to rewrite history on this issue. Each time Trump tried to paint himself as a champion of freedom during the pandemic, the crowd's jeers grew louder, reminding everyone that his actions directly contradicted core libertarian principles of individual liberty and limited government. The fascinating part was watching Trump's desperate attempts to defend himself. Each time he tried to pivot or deflect, the criticisms only became more specific and devastating. These weren't random hecklers, they were politically informed citizens who could cite specific policies, executive orders, and spending bills. The more he squirmed, the more they pressed. It was like watching a high school debate champion take on a kindergartner who memorized 3 talking points. Trump's facial expressions told the whole story. As the criticism mounted, his signature orange complexion deepened to a concerning shade of red. The realization was dawning on him. These people actually knew more about his presidential record than his own supporters. The stable genius facade was cracking under the pressure of informed scrutiny. His usual tactics of intimidation and bluster were completely ineffective against people who valued facts over loyalty. What made this encounter so revealing wasn't just that Trump was getting booed. Politicians face hostile crowds all the time. The devastating aspect was how specifically these libertarians targeted the gap between Trump's small government rhetoric and his big government actions. They exposed the fundamental contradiction at the heart of his political brand, claiming to fight the establishment while expanding federal power whenever it suited him. By the end of his speech, Trump looked genuinely rattled. His normally bombastic delivery had diminished to something closer to a defensive whimper. The libertarian crowd had accomplished what years of mainstream media criticism failed to do. They'd broken through his armor of self-delusion with targeted, fact-based criticism that he couldn't simply dismiss as fake news. With his armor of self-delusion cracked, Trump did what any cornered politician would do. He started making desperate promises so transparently fake that even my 5-year-old nephew would have called them out. The self-proclaimed master dealmaker suddenly remembered he was talking to libertarians and frantically flipped through his mental Rolodex of things libertarians might like, with all the authenticity of a plastic Christmas tree. "I will have a libertarian in my cabinet," Trump declared to the crowd, clearly thinking he'd just offered them an irresistible political cookie. Instead, the response was immediate and unmistakable. Hisses filled the room, like air escaping from the balloon of Trump's inflated ego. Imagine thinking you can buy off an entire political movement whose core belief is skepticism of government power by offering them a small slice of government power. That's like trying to convert vegans by offering them a slightly smaller steak. The libertarians weren't just unimpressed, they were insulted by the obvious last-minute bribe. This wasn't a negotiation with a real estate developer who could be dazzled by gold-plated fixtures. These were people who had built their entire political identity around rejecting exactly this kind of government carrot dangling. Trump might as well have offered free cookies to a room full of nutritionists. Not all his pandering fell completely flat though, when Trump pulled out his get-out-of-jail-free card, promising to commute Ross Ulbricht's life sentence. The mood shifted slightly. Ulbricht, the founder of Silk Road website, has become something of a cause célèbre among libertarians who view his case as government overreach.
Along with this torture video, it should be noted that even though the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 against Donald Trump, and he sent him to El Salvador despite the fact that he had protected status and was not giving due process, and Trump threw him in a concentration camp, on Sunday, Donald Trump filed paperwork in the federal courts with a declaration and a motion saying that
Free Ross signs appeared in the crowd, and some actually chanted the phrase. For a brief, shining moment, Trump managed to find common ground, though it felt less like genuine policy alignment and more like a hostage negotiator who finally remembered one of the kidnappers' demands. But any goodwill evaporated when Trump, in classic form, couldn't resist trying to attack Robert F. Kennedy Jr., completely misreading the room yet again. In Trump's binary world, anyone who isn't explicitly with him must be against his enemies too, right? Wrong. Many in the libertarian crowd actually preferred Kennedy's stance on issues like vaccine skepticism and individual liberties. Trump attacking Kennedy was like a door-to-door salesman insulting the homeowner's favorite relative, not exactly the path to closing the deal. Trump's desperation grew more apparent with each failed approach. He even tried making light of his own legal troubles, referencing the 4 criminal indictments against him with awkward, self-deprecating jokes. The crowd stared back with the enthusiasm of accountants at a tax audit. His attempt at humor only highlighted the serious nature of the charges against him and reminded everyone that this was a man potentially facing prison time asking for their vote. Not exactly a winning campaign slogan. You could almost see the wheels turning in Trump's head as each tactic crashed and burned. The famous Trump playbook, insult, distract, promise the moon, was proving about as effective as bringing a squirt gun to a forest fire. This wasn't his carefully curated MAGA crowd that would cheer if he read the phone book. These were people who actually cared about policy consistency and ideological principles. As Trump cycled through different approaches, from fake libertarian talking points to empty promises to failed jokes, his frustration became increasingly visible. His famous deal-making skills, which mostly involved bullying people with less power or money, were completely useless against an audience that valued ideas over intimidation. It was like watching a magician whose rabbit died mid-trick, desperately trying to distract the audience while searching for a backup plan. What made the spectacle particularly revealing wasn't just that Trump failed, it was how he failed. Each desperate pivot showed just how unprepared he was to face voters outside his carefully cultivated base. The man who claimed to be the voice of forgotten Americans clearly had no idea how to talk to Americans who thought differently than his core supporters. His pandering wasn't just ineffective, it was insulting in its assumption that complex political beliefs could be bought with superficial gestures. What we saw at the Libertarian Convention wasn't just a bad day for Trump, it was a full-on reality check. Outside his cozy MAGA bubble, Trump's inability to connect with voters who have different priorities became painfully obvious. When faced with an audience that actually understands policy and demands substance over slogans, the famous Trump charm evaporated faster than his hairspray in a rainstorm. This debacle proves that Trump's political superpower only works in carefully controlled environments. As November approaches, expect him to avoid any situation where genuine pushback might occur. After all, why risk another public meltdown when you can just pretend the whole embarrassing episode never happened?